It's been years since I first saw him. The footage? Yeah, I still have it. But I'll never show it to anyone. You wouldn't believe me anyway. I still hear the crickets outside in the yard, but tonight it's quieter than usual. Even the wind's holding its breath. I shouldn't be telling this, but it's been years, and it's been eating at me. You see, it all started in September 1987, just after a heavy rain. I was walking through the woods behind the old house, the same path I always take to the creek. That's when I saw him. I don't know how to explain it, but the clothes he was wearing, they looked so familiar, like they didn't belong to him. Tom Foster's red sweatshirt, his Levi's. I shouldn't have gone closer, but I did. And I saw something I wasn't ready for. I thought the worst part would be the video. It wasn't. It was late September 1987, the tail end of a wet season here near the Cascades. The leaves were turning, that deep amber and rust you only see in the Pacific Northwest when autumn really settles in. The damp smell of wet earth clung to everything, seeping into the wood of the porch, the fabric of our clothes. Nothing unusual about the day itself, at least not at first. I remember sitting on the porch with my brother Danny, the old rocking chairs creaking with every small movement we made. The distant sound of the Skycomish River carried through the trees, constant and reassuring. The scent of rain still hung fresh in the air after 3 solid days of steady drizzle that had turned our dirt driveway into a muddy mess. Just a normal evening in the mountains. Before everything changed, I mean. We talked about the usual things that brothers talk about when they've run out of new topics. Work at the mill where Danny spent his days. The Mariners losing another disappointing season. Whether the winter would come early this year, like old Jim Paulson down at the general store kept predicting. The trees seemed a little too still that evening, like everything in the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something none of us could name. I didn't think much of it at the time. Just another cool evening, just another quiet night in the shadow of the mountains. But then the knock came. Faint at first, like I might have imagined it. Then again, 3 knocks, slow but deliberate. Tap, 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 like someone rapping their knuckles on wood, but deeper, heavier. The sound carried across the clearing in a way that made my skin prickle. Danny looked at me, eyebrows raised, his beer can frozen halfway to his mouth. "You hear that?" I nodded. We sat there for a long moment, both of us listening hard. Nothing followed. Just the wind moving through the pines with that soft rushing sound. Just the creek in the distance. "Probably a branch," Danny said, but he didn't sound convinced by his own explanation. Neither was I. The knock had come from the tree line, maybe 50 yards out, where our property ended and the national forest began. Too deliberate to be a branch falling. Too rhythmic. Too purposeful. We went inside after that, neither of us saying much. I remember locking the door behind us, something I rarely did out here. My wife Sarah noticed from where she was washing dishes in the kitchen. "Everything okay?" she asked, drying her hands on a towel. I told her it was fine. That was the first lie I told about what happened that September, the first of many. The next day, Sarah was talking to our neighbor, Jenny Morrison, over the fence that separated our properties. Jenny lived about a quarter mile down the gravel road with her husband Mark and their 2 teenage boys. She'd mentioned hearing something strange in the woods the night before, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper people use when they're half embarrassed by what they're saying. "Footsteps," she said, "heavy ones. Branches snapping late at night, when there shouldn't be anything moving out there except maybe raccoons or possums." "Could be a bear," she'd said, trying to brush it off with a nervous laugh. "Mark says they get bold this time of year, looking for food before they den up." But she sounded unsure, like she wasn't convinced by her own explanation, like she needed someone else to tell her it was nothing. That evening, we went over to visit Jenny and Mark for dinner, bringing a bottle of wine and some of Sarah's homemade bread. Their place was warm and cluttered in the way houses with teenagers always are. During the meal, I overheard Mark talking to Danny in the living room about a man who'd gone missing a few months before. Tom Foster. The name hung in the air like smoke. They said he was from North Bend, about 20 miles south of us through the winding mountain roads, 34 years old, worked as a surveyor for the county. The way he disappeared, no one could figure it out. He'd gone hiking alone on a Tuesday morning in early June, told his wife he'd be back by dinner. His truck was found at a trailhead 3 days later when she finally convinced the sheriff to start looking. Keys still in the ignition, wallet on the dashboard with $43 inside. His day pack was still in the cab. No sign of struggle, no note, no indication of anything wrong. Just gone, like the forest had opened up and swallowed him whole. I tried to ignore the conversation, focusing on my dinner instead. People talk about Bigfoot around here, especially after a few beers and when the fire's burning low. It's part of living in the shadow of the Cascades, part of the mythology of the place. Campfire stories, tourist nonsense, something to laugh about with city folks who come up here expecting to see Sasquatch on every trail. I didn't want to get sucked into it, but there was something in the air that made it all feel different that night. Wrong, heavy. That night, walking back to our house with Sarah, I heard them again. 3 knocks. Same rhythm. Same weight behind each one. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed through the trees, impossibly clear in the still night air. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Sarah grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in tight. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice small and scared. I didn't answer because I didn't know what to tell her. The forest around us had gone completely silent. No crickets, no owl calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Nothing. Just those 3 knocks echoing in the darkness. And then nothing at all. We walked faster. By the time we got home, my heart was hammering in my chest, and Sarah's hand was still gripping my arm. She didn't let go until we were inside, with the door locked behind us. Tom Foster's name kept coming up over the next few days, like the whole town couldn't stop talking about him. At the general store where I bought coffee and cigarettes. At the gas station where I filled up the truck. People around town seemed to know his face from the missing person flyers that had been posted everywhere back in June, taped to telephone poles and store windows. They'd faded now in the rain and sun, but they were still there, still watching. I'd never met Tom Foster, but that didn't matter anymore. The strange thing was what I started noticing in the woods around our property. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, my imagination running wild because of all the talk. I'd go out to check the fence line or split firewood for winter, and I'd catch movement in the periphery of my vision. Shadow and shape where there shouldn't be anything but trees and deer trails. And the smell. God, the smell that started appearing in certain spots. It was almost like wet fur, but heavier, earthy and thick and wild, like something large had been lying in the underbrush for days, leaving its scent behind like a territorial marker. Not the clean smell of deer or elk passing through. Not the sharp musk of a bear. Something else. Something that made my stomach turn and my instincts scream at me to go back inside. I mentioned it to the ranger when he came through on his weekly patrol. His name was Tom Hendricks, been working these woods for 15 years, knew every trail and every troublemaker for miles around. He listened politely while I described the smell and the sounds, nodding in that patient way officials have when they're humoring you. Then he told me it was probably a bear getting ready for hibernation. They get bold this time of year, he said, looking for last meals before winter shuts them down, looking for easy food near houses. I wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that simple explanation and move on with my life. But I'd lived here my whole life, grown up hunting and fishing in these mountains. I knew what bears smelled like. This wasn't that. One afternoon, I was walking the creek trail, the same one I'd walked 100 times before since I was a kid. The water was running high from all the rain, rushing over the stones with a constant roar. That's when I saw it. Just a glimpse, through the Douglas firs. Something tall, impossibly tall, moving through the trees on two legs. Not four, two, moving with a strange, loping gait that wasn't quite human, but wasn't animal either. I froze mid-step, my hand instinctively going to the hunting knife on my belt, for all the good it would do. Whatever it was bigger than me, bigger than any man I'd ever seen, bigger than anything that should exist. It moved behind a thick stand of trees and disappeared like it had never been there at all. I stood there for 5 minutes, maybe longer, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Waiting, listening, watching. The forest had gone silent again, that unnatural silence that I was starting to recognize. When I finally walked home, my legs felt like water beneath me, and I kept looking back over my shoulder every few steps. It had rained again the night before, one of those steady mountain rains that soaks everything down to the roots and fills the creeks to bursting. I was out walking the next morning, thinking it'd be a good time to check the creek for any storm damage or fallen trees that might block the water flow. The ground was soft everywhere, muddy in places where the carpet of pine needles hadn't covered it. The air smelled clean and fresh, like wet stone and green growing things. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Deep impressions in the soft mud near the creek bank. Not human, not bear, not elk or deer or cougar, or anything I recognized from a lifetime of tracking game in these woods. They were huge. I measured them later with my hand, fingers spread wide, and they were at least 16 inches long, maybe more. 5 toes clearly visible in the mud, each one leaving its own distinct impression. The stride between them was longer than my own by half again, maybe more. Whatever made these tracks was tall, heavy, powerful. The same wet fur smell lingered in the air around the prints, stronger than before, concentrated, like the thing had stood here for a while. I looked around, scanning the tree line with my heart in my throat. Nothing moved, just the sound of the creek rushing over stones, swollen from the rain and moving fast, just the wind in the high branches. I called Danny out to show him, running back to the house and pounding on his door until he answered. He lived just down the road in a cabin even smaller than ours. He came over within 15 minutes, still pulling on his boots. But by the time we got back to the creek, most of the prints had started to fill with water. The edges were collapsing, the details washing away. Maybe the rain washed them away, he said, kneeling down to look closer, reaching out but not quite touching them. Ground's pretty soft. But I knew what I'd seen. The prints had been clear as day when I first found them. I took photos with my camera, one of those cheap disposable ones from the drugstore that held 24 pictures. The images came out grainy and unclear when I got them. Developed a week later at the Walmart in town, but I could still see the outline of those massive tracks, still see the impossibility of their size. I called the ranger station that afternoon from the payphone outside the general store. Hendricks laughed it off when I described what I'd found. Probably someone playing a prank, he said, sounding amused. We get that sometimes. Kids making fake prints with plywood cutouts. Saw it a lot back in the 70s when that Patterson film came out. Everyone wanted to be the next one to spot Bigfoot. But I knew what I saw, and I knew what I had to do. I started carrying my camcorder with me whenever I went outside. One of those big VHS models that Sarah's parents had given us for Christmas 2 years back. Heavy as a brick, awkward to carry, but it recorded. If something was out there, if this thing was real, I was going to get proof. In the back of my mind, I kept thinking about Tom Foster, about his truck with the keys in the ignition, about his wallet with the money still inside, about how the search teams had combed these woods for a week and found nothing. Not a shred of clothing, not a single clue, not even a trace. The forest can swallow a man whole if it wants to. That's what people say around here, usually with a knowing look. But what if it wasn't the forest? What if something in the forest had taken him? What if that something was still out here, leaving footprints the size of dinner plates? Later that night, after dinner, I stood out on the porch while Sarah cleaned up inside. She'd gone to bed early the past few nights, exhausted from her shifts at the diner in town where she worked the morning rush. Danny had gone home after looking at the footprints, shaking his head like he didn't know what to believe. The forest was dark, that deep black you only get when there's no moon and heavy cloud cover blocking the stars. I had a flashlight in one hand, the camcorder in the other, feeling like an idiot but unable to shake the compulsion to watch, to wait. Probably stupid, probably reckless. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there watching our house, watching me. That's when I saw it. Movement across the tree line, barely visible in the darkness. Something tall, much taller than a man, 7 feet at least, maybe 8. It didn't move like a bear. Bears amble, lumber side to side with that distinctive rolling gait. This thing moved with purpose, upright, on 2 legs, confident. It stood still for a moment at the edge of the clearing, maybe 60 yards from the porch where I was standing. I couldn't make out details in the darkness, couldn't see features or color, just the massive silhouette against the slightly lighter backdrop of the forest behind it. Just the shape of something that shouldn't exist. I swear I could feel its eyes on me, the weight of its gaze like a physical pressure. That's when I heard them again. 3 knocks, deliberate, measured, purposeful, right, at the edge of the woods where the thing was standing. Tap, tap, tap. The sound carried across the clearing, clear as a bell, impossible to mistake. My hand started shaking so bad I nearly dropped the camcorder. I raised it with trembling fingers, fumbled with the power switch in the dark. The little red recording light came on, burning like a tiny star in the darkness. I pointed it toward the tree line, trying to hold it steady. But when I looked through the viewfinder, the figure was gone. Just empty darkness and swaying branches. Just the usual shapes of the forest at night. I stood there for what felt like forever, my finger on the record button, the tape running and recording, nothing but darkness. Waiting for it to come back, praying it wouldn't, hoping it would. It never did. The forest stayed silent and still. When I finally stepped inside, my shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool evening air. My hands were still shaking. I didn't tell Sarah what I'd seen, didn't want her to think I was losing my mind, didn't want to worry her. But I kept the camcorder by the door from that night on, always charged, always ready. The next day, I went out into the woods, deeper than before, past the familiar trails, past the spots where I usually hunted or fished. I don't know what I expected to find, but I couldn't sit around the house waiting anymore. The not knowing was eating at me. I followed the creek upstream, past the usual fishing spots where the trout pool in the deeper water, into territory I rarely visited. The canopy was thick here, old-growth Douglas fir and western red cedar blocking out most of the sunlight even at midday. The trunks were massive, some of them 6 feet across, the kind of trees that had been growing here for centuries. The air felt different under that canopy, heavier, cooler, like the forest was pressing in on all sides, watching. After about 2 miles of hard walking, scrambling over fallen logs and pushing through thick underbrush, I came to a clearing. Small, maybe 30 feet across. The ground was covered in moss and ferns, and a rotting log lay across one side, covered in shelf mushrooms. The light filtered down through the canopy in dusty shafts. And that's when I saw him, Bigfoot, standing on the far side of the clearing, maybe 20 feet away. I know how that sounds. I know what people think when they hear that word. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. But I don't know what else to call what I saw. He was massive, 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was hard to judge with nothing familiar to compare him to. Covered in dark brown fur that looked wet and matted. Broad shoulders that would make a linebacker look small. Long arms that hung down past his knees. His face was partially hidden in shadow, but I could see the eyes. Dark, deep, intelligent. watching me with an expression I couldn't read, and he was wearing clothes, Tom Foster's clothes. I recognized them immediately from the missing person. Flyers that were still posted around town, the sweatshirt, Pendleton brand, distinctive pattern. The Levi's jeans, faded and torn now, but unmistakable. They didn't fit him, obviously. The shirt was stretched tight across his massive chest, the buttons straining. The sleeves only came down to his elbows. The jeans looked like shorts on his long legs, the fabric torn and muddy. But it was Tom Foster's clothes. No question, no doubt. My brain shut down, just stopped processing. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But it was. He was standing right there, wearing a missing man's clothes, looking at me with those dark, intelligent eyes. I don't know how long we stood there, seconds, minutes. Time lost all meaning. My hand moved on its own, raising the camcorder that I'd been carrying. The red recording light came on. I was filming. Actually filming Bigfoot, filming him wearing Tom Foster's clothes. The evidence of what happened. The answer to a mystery that had haunted this town for months. He watched me film him. Didn't move, didn't run. Just stood there, letting me record. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned and walked away. Not running, not scrambling, just walking. Calm, purposeful. Disappearing into the dense underbrush like he was made of smoke, like he belonged there, and I was the intruder. I stood there, frozen, the camcorder still recording, my brain trying to process what I'd just seen, what I'd just filmed. When I finally moved, my legs almost gave out. I had to sit down on the rotting log, my head between my knees, trying not to throw up. The video? I had it on video. Bigfoot wearing Tom Foster's clothes. Proof. Evidence. The answer everyone had been looking for. And I had no idea what to do with it. I made it back to the house somehow, stumbling through the forest like a drunk man. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the camcorder. Sarah was in the garden when I came out of the tree line. She took one look at my face and dropped her trowel. "What happened?" she asked, rushing over. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, unable to speak. She helped me inside, sat me down at the kitchen table, brought me water. I drank it without tasting it. "I need to show you something," I finally said. "The video?" We watched it on the TV in the living room. I'd rewound the tape to the right spot. Pressed play. The footage was shaky. My hands had been trembling while I filmed, but there was no mistaking what was on the screen. Bigfoot, clear as day, standing in that clearing, and wearing Tom Foster's red sweatshirt and jeans. Sarah gasped, put her hand over her mouth. We watched it 3 times without speaking. "That's impossible," she whispered. "That's not real." But it was real. We both knew it. The question was what to do about it. I called Danny. He came over immediately, bringing a 6-pack of beer that we didn't touch. He watched the video 5 times. "Jesus Christ," he kept saying. "Jesus Christ." "We have to call someone," Sarah said. "The sheriff, the ranger, someone." "And tell them what?" I asked. "That Bigfoot killed Tom Foster and is wearing his clothes?" "We don't know he killed him," Danny said quietly. We all looked at each other. "We have to tell someone," Sarah insisted. "Tom Foster's family deserves to know what happened to him." She was right. Of course she was right, but I couldn't stop thinking about those eyes, the way Bigfoot had looked at me, not with aggression, not with fear, just with that calm, intelligent awareness, like he was a person, like he understood what was happening. "If we show this to the authorities," I said slowly, "they'll come out here with guns. They'll hunt him, kill him, stuff him, and put him in a museum." "He might have killed someone," Sarah said. "We don't know that," I argued. "Maybe Tom got hurt. Maybe he fell. Maybe Bigfoot found the clothes and put them on. We don't know what happened. But even as I said it, I knew how it sounded, like I was making excuses, like I was protecting a killer. The truth was, I didn't know. I had no idea what happened to Tom Foster. But I knew what would happen to Bigfoot if the world found out he was real. The hunters would come, the scientists, the media. They'd turn these woods into a circus, and they'd hunt him down. I need to think about this, I said. Just give me some time. Sarah wasn't happy. Danny looked conflicted, but they agreed to wait, to keep it quiet while I figured out what to do. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Tom Foster's face from the missing person flyers, kept thinking about his wife waiting for him to come home, his family holding out hope. And I had the answer, right there on tape, but I couldn't share it. Not yet. I kept the video hidden, put the tape in a box in the back of my closet, and tried to pretend it didn't exist. But it haunted me. Every day, every night, the weight of what I knew, what I wasn't telling. Danny came by a few days later. We sat on the porch, not talking much. Finally, he said, "You know we can't keep this secret forever." I know. Tom Foster's family deserves closure. I know that too. We sat in silence for a while. "So what are we going to do?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. The days turned into weeks. Fall deepened into the cold bite of early winter. The leaves fell from the trees. The rains came harder and more frequent. I went through the motions of normal life, work, home, trying to be a good husband. But the secret ate at me. Sarah barely spoke to me. She'd look at the closet where I kept the tape and then look at me with something like disappointment, like she didn't know who I was anymore. I tried to justify it to myself, tried to convince myself I was doing the right thing. Bigfoot was a living creature, intelligent, maybe even more intelligent than we knew. He deserved to live without being hunted, without being turned into a spectacle. But Tom Foster's family deserved answers. Deserved to know what happened to their son, their husband, their brother. I was stuck between two impossible choices: protect Bigfoot or give the Fosters closure. There was no middle ground, no compromise. One night, about 3 weeks after I'd filmed the video, I heard the knocks again. 3 knocks. Tap, tap, tap. I went to the window and looked out. He was there, standing at the tree line, still wearing Tom's sweatshirt. The moonlight caught him for just a moment, making him visible. He raised one massive hand, not threatening, almost like a wave, like an acknowledgement. I raised mine back, slowly, carefully. We stood there for a moment, two beings looking at each other across the divide between species, between worlds. Then he was gone. That's when I made my decision. I couldn't turn him in, couldn't risk what would happen to him. The video would stay hidden. The secret would stay mine. Tom Foster would remain a missing person. His family would have to live with the not knowing, and I would have to live with the guilt. It wasn't fair, it wasn't right, but it was the choice I made. A few weeks later, I saw him again. I was out cutting firewood near the property line, about 100 yards from the house. The afternoon sun was filtering through the trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The air was cold, winter settling in for real. That's when I caught movement in my peripheral vision, the same massive shape, the same deliberate movements. But this time he wasn't alone. There was something smaller with him, maybe 4 feet tall, covered in lighter brown fur, almost cinnamon-colored. Moving close to the larger figure, staying within arm's reach like a child staying near its parent. A young one. Bigfoot had a family. I set down the axe slowly, carefully, trying not to make any sudden movements or sounds. They were maybe 50 yards away, moving parallel to my position through the trees. Heading north. Bigfoot looked in my direction once, just a brief glance. He knew I was there, knew I was watching, but he didn't seem threatened, didn't change his path or speed. Just kept walking, the young one following behind, mimicking his movements. he was still wearing Tom Foster's red sweatshirt. The red pattern was unmistakable even at this distance. It looked even more absurd in daylight, stretched across his massive frame. But he wore it anyway. Maybe for warmth, maybe because he liked it, maybe for reasons I couldn't begin to understand or guess at. They disappeared into the thick underbrush, heading toward the higher elevations where the really deep forest began. I stood there for a long time after they were gone, the axe forgotten at my feet, my breath making clouds in the cold air. Everything I thought I knew about Bigfoot, about what he was, had been challenged. He wasn't some mindless beast. He was a father, a provider, a being with family and relationships and a life beyond my understanding. He was taking care of his offspring, teaching it, protecting it, living his life in these woods the same way I was trying to live mine in my house. That was the last time I saw him that year. Winter came in hard. The snow piled up 4 feet deep in some places, closing off the high trails and making the forest impassable. I thought about them sometimes during the long winter nights, wondered where they went when the temperature dropped below freezing. If they had shelter, a cave maybe, if they had enough food stored up, if the young one would survive its first winter in these harsh mountains. Sarah asked me once why I spent so much time staring out at the woods. I told her I was just watching for deer. She didn't believe me, but she didn't push. The distance between us had grown. The secret sat between us like a wall. Danny stopped coming by as much. He'd made his feelings clear. We should tell someone, but he respected my decision even if he didn't agree with it. The tape stayed in its box, hidden, a secret that only 3 people knew. Spring came late in 1988. The snow didn't fully melt until mid-April, and even then, patches of it remained in the deep shadows under the big trees. By May, the forest had come alive again with birdsong and the smell of new growth. The creek ran high with snowmelt, rushing and loud. I'd almost convinced myself that the whole thing had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Almost. Then one morning in early June, exactly 1 year after Tom Foster had gone missing, I found something on the porch. A basket. Not a modern basket from a store. It was woven from cedar bark and willow branches, the kind the local tribes used to make 100 years ago. The craftsmanship was incredible, tight and even. Inside were huckleberries, fresh, ripe, still cold from the morning dew. I looked around. The forest was quiet, no sign of who'd left it. But I knew. Of course I knew. Sarah found it when she came out for her morning coffee, still in her bathrobe. "Where'd this come from?" she asked, picking up a berry and examining it. I told her one of the neighbors must have dropped it off. Maybe Jenny. She accepted that explanation without question, took the berries inside to wash them for breakfast. But I knew better. It was a gift, a thank you maybe, for not telling, for keeping the secret, for choosing his safety over the truth. I started leaving things out after that. Small offerings placed at the edge of the property where the forest began. Apples from our tree when they ripened. Smoked fish from the creek. Bread that Sarah baked. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would raise questions. The offerings were always gone by morning. We'd created a truce, an understanding, an unspoken agreement between 2 intelligent beings. He stayed in his world. I stayed in mine. But we acknowledged each other, respected each other, protected each other in our own ways. One night in late July, I heard the 3 knocks again. Tap, tap, tap. I went to the window and looked out. There he was, standing at the tree line in the moonlight, still wearing the red sweatshirt. It was more faded now, more worn, but still recognizably Tom Foster's shirt. He raised one massive hand. I raised mine back. An acknowledgement, a greeting, a reminder that we both existed in this space. Then he was gone, melting back into the shadows. The video stayed in its box. I never showed it to anyone else. Not the news when they came sniffing around on the 1-year anniversary of Tom Foster's disappearance. Not the researchers from the university who'd heard rumors of Bigfoot sightings in the area. Not the cryptozoologists who showed up with their fancy equipment. Not anyone who came asking questions. Let them think it was a bear attack. Let them think Tom had gotten lost and died of exposure. Let them think whatever they wanted. The truth was mine to keep, mine and Bigfoot's. And I was keeping it. By late summer, Sarah and I had decided to move, not because of fear, not because of Bigfoot, but because the secret had created a distance between us that we couldn't bridge. She'd wanted me to tell the truth. I'd refused. That disagreement had poisoned something between us. She got a job offer in Everett, closer to her family, working at a better diner with better tips. We sold the house that October. The new owners were a young couple from Seattle looking for a quiet place to raise their kids away from the city. I never told them about the knocks, about the footprints, about the basket, about what lived in those woods. Let them discover it on their own, or not at all. The quiet followed me even after we moved. Even in Everett, living in a regular neighborhood with regular neighbors and street lights and the sound of traffic, I couldn't shake what I'd seen. What I knew. I'd hear sounds at night, ordinary sounds like car doors closing or dogs barking, and my mind would go back to those 3 knocks. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of something impossible trying to communicate. I'd be in the garage working on the car, and I'd smell something that reminded me of wet fur and earth, and I'd freeze. Just for a second. Just long enough to remember those dark, intelligent eyes watching me from across a forest clearing. Just long enough to remember Tom Foster's red sweatshirt stretched across a massive chest. Sarah noticed the change in me. "You've been different since we left the house," she said one night over dinner. Quieter, more distant. I told her I was fine, another lie to add to the growing pile. The truth was, I'd left part of myself in those woods. The part that believed in impossible things. The part that had looked a creature from legend in the eyes and seen something looking back. The part that had chosen to protect a mystery rather than solve it. Danny visited sometimes when he came down to the city for supplies or to see a doctor. We'd sit in my small backyard, drinking beer from cans, talking about nothing important. But eventually, always the conversation would drift back to that September. "You ever think about it?" he'd ask, his voice quiet. "About Bigfoot?" I'd nod. Of course I did. Every single day. Every single night. "Think he's still out there?" Danny would ask. "Still wearing that shirt?" I'd like to think so. Like to think he and his family are still living in those mountains, far from roads and people and civilization. Still leaving baskets of berries for whoever lives in our old house now. Still knocking 3 times when he wants to communicate. Still surviving in a world that doesn't believe he exists. The video box moved with us from the old house. I keep it in the attic now, behind the Christmas decorations and the boxes of books Sarah won't throw away. Sometimes I go up there late at night when I can't sleep, when the insomnia gets bad and the house feels too quiet. I hold the box. Feel the weight of the tape inside. Think about what it would mean to show it to the world, the proof everyone wants, the evidence that Bigfoot is real. But I never do, never open it, never even put the tape in a player, because that creature gave me a gift more valuable than fame or recognition. He trusted me. He showed himself to me. Let me film him. And in return, I chose to protect him. He could have hurt me a dozen times over, could have attacked, could have killed me the way everyone assumes he killed Tom Foster. Instead, he walked away, left baskets of berries, waved from the tree line like a neighbor, gave me a choice. And I chose him. I chose his safety over the truth. I chose his life over closure for Tom Foster's family. I'd make that choice again, every single time, even knowing the cost, even knowing the guilt, even knowing what it did to my marriage and my peace of mind. A few months ago, I heard something that brought it all back. 3 knocks. It was late, maybe 3 in the morning. I was up anyway, insomnia being a regular companion these days. The sound came from downstairs, from the back door. Tap, tap, tap. My heart jumped, actually jumped in my chest. I went downstairs in the dark, my hand on the railing, looked through the window of the back door. Nothing but the backyard, the fence, the shadows of suburban houses, the glow of distant streetlights. I opened the door anyway, stepped out onto the small patio in my bare feet. The concrete was cold. The air smelled like rain, like earth, like forest. Just for a moment, like a memory made physical. Then it was gone. I don't know if anyone will believe this. Most won't. That's okay. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm just telling you what happened. What I saw in those woods in September 1987. What I filmed on a cheap VHS camcorder that's probably degraded by now anyway. Tom Foster's family deserves to know the truth about what happened to him. But I can't give them that truth without destroying Bigfoot, without bringing hunters and scientists and media attention to those mountains, without ending the life of an intelligent being who's done nothing wrong except exist. So this is what I can offer instead. A confession, a testimony, a story that will probably be dismissed as fantasy. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. I know what I filmed. Those dark eyes still haunt me sometimes, but not in a bad way. More like a reminder of something profound, a reminder that there are things in this world we don't understand, things that deserve to exist beyond our need to explain them, to categorize them, to own them. The video stays in its box. The truth stays with me. And somewhere in the Cascades, I hope Bigfoot is still out there, still wearing Tom Foster's red sweatshirt, still knocking 3 times when he has something to say.